I want to take you back to 2009. You're working for an international aid group based in Washington, D.C. You're on a career high after 5 years filing news reports for Channel 7, Al Jazeera English and Reuters. At that stage, working overseas, in amongst that, you were just thriving. It was your childhood dream. Then one afternoon, you're tapping away on the computer when your boss appears and he clutches the door frame. Glancing into your office to make sure no one else is there, he looked distressed. You could feel the tension in the air. He softly and reluctantly told you that he'd just come from a meeting where the CEO had decided a few people were being let go. You were one of them.
Yeah, I was one of them. I couldn't believe it. I was living my dream life. That job was nirvana. It was basically for an international aid organisation where I was helping people on the ground through food security, infrastructure, emergency aid, and my job was gone. I had just been to Iraq, I'd been to Georgia, I'd been to Jordan, and here he was telling me that my dream was over, it was done, and I was devastated. I just held myself together, got home and just cried the whole night. I was just absolutely gutted. It was more than that. I knew that the CEO didn't like me. Well, it was revealed pretty quickly that the CEO knew that I was sort of onto what was happening in the organisation. He was onto the fact that I recognised there was a misappropriation of funds happening. His son was running IT, and his son was reading emails that were being sent between all senior leadership, right? Like I'm a naive little Aussie girl. Like I assumed that any email I wrote wasn't being spied on, by management.
They're always
right?
watching.
They're always watching. I know. What was I thinking? I was so naive and idealistic. And essentially what happened was I'd flagged a misappropriation of funds with my boss, Rick, who told me I'd lost my job. And they didn't want me anywhere near the business because they wanted people who were on board and who weren't going to provoke, who were not going to ask any questions about how the business was being run. So I'd seen money being misspent, US taxpayers' dollars. And at the time, the US taxpayer was very sensitive to how their money was being spent, particularly in Iraq. And I flagged it. I said, if this gets bigger, if this gets out, we're going to have a reputational crisis that this business probably won't recover from. And that's pretty much what happened. And
as an investigative journalist, you're always one, right? So that doesn't go away. So
of course, yeah.
Rigor and finding information and then seeing clues, your antenna would have been like, oh.
But also being a good human.
And morals.
And integrity.
And a good fabric.
And again, if I'm going to walk past something and turn a blind eye to it, what does that say about me? That's not who I am. And at the time, I didn't realise how big it was going to be and how much it was going to impact me, but I was not prepared to walk past something that was essentially wrong.
So how big did it become? What did that story evolve to?
I spoke to a reporter at USA Today, and it was a fairly big story. The Washington Post contacted me. My memo that I wrote to my boss ended up being published by the Post, and it was all on. So the senior leadership of the business they all had to stand down. My understanding is everyone lost their job in senior leadership. The FBI investigated. At one point, there was discussion around congressional testimony. US Aid and State Department had halted funding to this business, who were given $2 billion to rebuild Iraq and Afghanistan.
$2 billion
so
with a B.
Huge money. And huge implications for the hundreds of people who were part of this organisation, who were all phenomenal people doing amazing work. My intention was not to have my memo impact them. My intention was to improve the quality of leadership that was at the top of that business. And it was a family-run business. And they were paying themselves a lot more money than what they should have, and they were giving themselves bonuses that were quite inflated. So I effectively, looking back on it now, brought down a family business that was taking advantage of US taxpayer money. It's as simple as that.
Was that the start of this whole notion of you going, the media landscape is changing, business is changing, I need to upskill myself? Is there a crucible moment in amongst that, or was it just more of a ticking away? You're very perceptive. I know that from knowing you. Were you putting together patterns and cues, or did something actually happen that you went bang?
Well, when you lose a job in a foreign country and your work visa is entirely dependent on having that job, reality hits you pretty fast. So I had 10 working days to find a new job or leave the country. I was thinking, how do I future-proof myself so I can never feel this degree of vulnerability again, because it felt awful. No one was going to come in and save me. I had to figure it out. I had to workshop the problem while being highly emotional about the whole thing, because I didn't want to pack up my apartment in Washington and come home early. I wanted to stay there and keep doing great work. So for me, the overarching question when things settled was, how do I become future fit? How do I become a person who is constantly paying attention to those signals of change, who is undisruptible in a sense? And what are the skills that I need to always be engaged, employed, and feeling good, feeling happy? Because we can all get a job, but you want to have a job that you love, that gives you meaning and that is fulfilling. And so that was the first moment that I started to percolate around, what do I really need to be future fit for my whole career, not just for this year.
Great segue into an article you wrote for AFR. And I can remember reading this at the time, going, well, that's a cracker of an article. You called out Peter Dutton and Adam Brandt to rebound from being fired, emphasising that losing a job doesn't have to end a career, but can instead redefine it. You've lived that. The article discusses how leaders can rebound from being fired. We don't often say fired, do we? We say we've been outsourced, let go of, retrenched. There was some economic rationalisation, but I still think about something about Mary, that movie. You step in my office, you're fucking fired. And you emphasise in your article that it can actually highlight the importance of managing the narrative around a job loss. There is chaos, but it can also lead to a lot of growth. You need to embrace resilience, learn from the experience, and strategically plan the next steps.
Resilience is a doing word, right? You can't just read about resilience and feel more resilient. You've got to do it. You've got to go through it.
It's posters on the workshop. It's giving people a stress ball.
That's right. If you don't have a setback, you're not going to build anything. You're not going to build any skill set, mindset, or behaviours that are going to help you manage something else that comes along. So for me, I got a really strong response from that article, because it is a moment in your life that you'll never forget. I say you never know who your friends are until you lose your job or you get divorced, or you write a book. I've done 2 of those things, 2 of those 3.
So done 3.
Do you think that's fair?
Who's doing the interview here? Typical. Every time this happens with a journalist, you end up like our coffee conversation. I said, hey, I know what you're doing. Let's flip it around.
But
totally.
Do you think that's reasonable?
Totally.
Right? So I knew when I lost my job who my friends were, and that was such an important part of that recovery process, to get on the phone with people who I loved, who I knew loved me, and say, I'm really in trouble. I have got 10 days to find a new job and I need your help. And I hope I never have to ask you this question again. But how can you connect me with job processes? How can I be a candidate in those processes that are already well underway? And that was how I got out of that situation, by finding a job, by having someone believe in me and place me into a process. But knowing your network, and the last thing you want to do when you lose a job is start a LinkedIn profile, right? That's not the day to create a LinkedIn profile. You want to be meaningfully and genuinely working, giving to your network, developing and curating, developing and working on meaningful friendships and spending time with people, giving to your network, not because you hope to get something back, but because that allows you to almost go 3-dimensional in what you're learning, right? So knowing who your friends are, knowing your network is more than just having 4,000 people on LinkedIn.
Yeah, you see that when someone loses a job, and I want to go back to that word loss in a minute, and then they look desperate. Yeah. And desperate doesn't sell, whether it's job interviews, dating, any interaction in our lives. When you're desperate, you can smell it a million miles away. So you go back to those 3 areas. So losing a job, losing a relationship. So not just divorce, but it could be someone's been in a relationship that they thought was going to be a long-time relationship. Writing a book is just traumatic. We've spoken about that. But it's a beautiful outcome when you write a book like this. But on those 2, loss and how we frame loss as individuals, I think, and I'm keen on your view on this, whether you initiated the loss or whether the loss was initiated on you. So one of the questions I had for you, being changed and changing are 2 very different things as far as your emotions. You want to try and stitch all that together for me?
And they both require reflection. That is a point of reflection. So if you are the recipient of change, unexpected change, that reflection should include what were the signals of change that I missed. And paying attention to signals of change, I think, is everything.
Yeah, look, we've been arguing for the last 10 years and we've hardly been, but we went on a holiday at Easter and we held hands. I'm paraphrasing.
Everything is fine.
I'm going to give this to a mate of mine. I won't say his name, but he was in a relationship for years and then broke up and he was like, I can't believe. I was like, hey, mate, like it's often easy though on the outside looking in. Is that But
don't you know in your gut?
I think so.
In your gut something's not right. I remember being at Channel 7 in Melbourne in 2012 and thinking I knew that newsroom had to make cuts. And I'm like, what are the signals now?
But some people are much more intuitive.
Yeah.
And have that.
And I think there's a level of humility.
That radar.
Okay, this is what being a reporter taught me. My job for 17 years was to show up to the worst day of somebody's life every single day. And as a reporter, you can't go through life covering all kinds of things without developing a sense of anything is possible. Anything is possible, right? And as a civilian walking around, you've got your routine, you're going to your job 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. You're never necessarily exposed to what can go wrong in life for other people. So you're almost living in a little loop of positive reinforcement. And as a journalist, my job is to show up to think of anything you've ever seen on the news, that a version of that is something I would have covered. So I show up to a house fire and the owner says to me, I can't believe this has happened. I never imagined this was possible. And what you start to realize about everything in life is that actually anything is entirely possible. So that is something that we need to bring into our thought patterns more frequently. What is changing around me? How might change play out? And what is possible within that particular framework?
So that job scope and self-awareness has trained you in that?
That was extraordinary.
A lot of people I call it the same game. You wake up in the same bed, in the same house, next to the same person. You have the same greeting. Yeah. You have the same shower, you put on the same clothes, you take the same bus or the same route to work, you buy the same coffee from the same barista, the same middle-aged male, makes the same shit jokes and the barista laughs because it's called competition and they want you to come and you have the same meetings with the same people, the same early, the same late, the same, and I'm only at 8:30, shut up because I've got a headache. Whereas you've come from
chaos.
Yeah.
I've come from chaos.
You've got a distribution curve. You're at far side and there's some people on the other. Probably most of us are somewhere in the middle of that.
So every time I'd be on the way to the newsroom every day, I'd be thinking, I wonder what I'm going to get assigned today. I could walk in one morning in Washington. It was especially crazy. In Washington, I'd come in one morning. Can you go and cover George Bush? There's a massive protest going on. Can you go cover the protest? It's talking to Oprah on the Kennedy Center Awards red carpet. It's going to Iraq. It's fires. It's floods. It's hurricanes. It's anything. So my life has been covering chaos for a long time. Half of my career. And so it's really interesting when you're in the slipstream of chaos, like it does become easier. You become more adaptable because you're dealing with 100 different micro adaptations every single day. That is not what sameness gives to the same game. And we are addicted to sameness. We are obsessed with our routine because that keeps us safe.
Even if you're sad, overweight, fatigued, stressed out, we like the repetition because it gives us this uncomfortable comfort. You've got this aperture, I can see even just talking to you, where you are adapting and you're looking at what's going on. When you talk about those signals of change, they're all around. So let's say some people have really heightened that level, which you have honed 17 years as a journo, and you're doing that in your job now.
But when it comes to the same game, we are addicted to sameness because that's what keeps us safe. That's how our brains are wired. That helps us conserve energy. And that is why we order the same coffee every single day. And so it's an active effort to break that script and counter that narrative that our mind has. And it's because we are by default associating change with loss. Because if I said to you, if anyone listening, imagine you get an email from your boss and it says, we need to talk at 10 a.m. Where does your mind go? Holy shit.
She's going to buy me a free coffee.
Shit. No. I'm going to lose my job. I've done something wrong. So we're deep.
It's our biological default.
Right? And so And I think that we need to be breaking that script as often as we can to think, what's the upside to that change? Like, what if I do lose my job? And what if that gives me the opportunity to pursue something that I've always wanted to pursue? Like, even in very small ways, how do we start breaking that script?
It was a podcast you did with QVB about the book Adapt. So can you go back in the cockpit of that Cessna as a young girl?
Yeah, sure. So Dad had the three, I was in a Cessna 210 single engine six-seater with my dad, in the plane with my two sisters, and we were at 9,000 feet and we were flying from Moree into the Gold Coast, northern New South Wales, into the GC. And at 9,000 feet we had engine failure, and you don't have to be afraid of flying to understand what it means when you hear silence, when you hear an engine stall at altitude. And what happened in that moment was a profound lesson in the power of adaptability. So I saw Dad very calmly hand a map to my sister, Megan, and said, find me a place to land, while he workshopped the problem, while he looked up and out over the dashboard. If you've been in a light plane, you know what I mean. It's not like a car. You've got to look up. While he looked up and out at what was happening around him and where we were going to land. At the same time, he was looking at the instruments, figuring out on this much power, like he restarted, I think, 25%. So how much range did we have with the power that we had in the engine at the time? So he was calculating all of that while at the same time looking up and out. He was applying new thinking to a new problem, an untested scenario, and that was high AQ. It wasn't IQ or EQ that helped him figure out how to land that plane in one piece. It was purely about his adaptability in the moment. So composed, so controlled. And I say to people, when you lose an engine at 9,000 feet, who do you want at the wheel? Do you want someone who's panicking and reactive, or do you want someone who's ready? We all need to be ready for change. And that means a whole range of things, but that is where adaptability comes into play, applying new thinking to new problems and doing it in the moment and doing it calmly and doing it in a composed manner and leading other people around you through that drama and that chaos, but leading them in a way that gives them direction, protection and order and makes them feel safe. I never at any moment felt in danger. Dad turned around to us and he said, we're going to be okay, but if I ask you to do anything, I need you to do it. And we were like, done.
I want to talk about that story on two levels. First, I'm going to play back what I've taken out of that, and I'm putting on a lens of coaching psychology, change management, leadership, and the book. And then I want to put a lens on it. What was it really like sitting in there? So the 5 words that just jump out. Your dad had vision and that ability to look up. He had problem solving. So he's in that front part of the cerebral cortex. So he's obviously regulating stress. He's staying calm, which is a totally trainable mental skill. And calm is I'm ready to respond to whatever happens, not reacting. Shit. Would have been easy to spiral. There was energy management going on, and you even chose the words around that. So he was looking at, I've only got so much energy, I need to save that. And there was a coaching element to that as well. And again, I'm looking at the research on this, social contagion theory. You know, the mirror neurons in the front of our cerebral cortex. So if your dad's stressing out, you and your sister at a very young age, you're going to stress out. So summary, he had vision and foresight. He was doing problem solving in real time. He was staying calm. So he's regulating his nervous system. He's managing energy and he's controlling different parts of the brain. So it has the mirror or cascading effect on you and your sister. How on earth did he learn that?
3,000 hours. So on the day of that incident, he had 3,000 hours up, either flying in the simulator or with an instructor. And when you are learning to fly a light plane, you will be midair and the instructor will turn the engine off and say, it's over to you. So he had been training for change. And I believe that is something that we all should do. We all need to find our own version of a simulator and get into that simulator and say, what if? So he'd been in the simulator asking, what if this happens? What if that happens? How am I going to have the mental flexibility to apply everything I know and figure that out? But what if something else goes wrong? So they're constantly running what if scenarios, which is how we become better prepared for change. So why can't we do that? Even if it's 5 minutes a day, that will develop our mental flexibility.
And what a great learning for you.
Oh yeah, it was extraordinary.
When you go back there, do you remember how you felt?
Oh,
because you're so calm telling that story, and you've probably told that story a number of times. What emotion does that trigger?
Only a couple of times but I sat down with my sisters and dad and we went through his logbook and we all recounted that day and I got everyone's version of the story. And the interesting thing to me was how similar those versions are. My sisters and I are very close, and we remember being calm and composed because Dad was. We had so much confidence in his ability to manage that situation because we had been flying with him in so many, for so long, and we grew up flying with Dad. And he gave us the confidence in his ability to negotiate that unknown, untested scenario. So it makes, and still today I feel what I got out of that, what emotion does that trigger in me? The confidence to know that being high AQ gives you options. And that's what I want for everyone who reads Adapt. I want us all to take control over our own ability to be an active player in change. And whenever the engine fails for any of us, I want us to say, I got it, no drama. I'm going to apply all this knowledge to this untested scenario, and I'm going to come out of it stronger. And I'm going to lead, and the people around me are going to see that that's possible, that it's possible to be calm, composed, because I've done the work behind the scenes and I've done my own version of 3,000 hours up to save this day.
Training for change. And I talk about front-loading cognitive skills so you can pull them out of your pocket when you need the most. Now, the language back then when you're traveling from Moree to Gold Coast, it wouldn't be, hey, I'm glad I've front-loaded these cognitive skills. It's like 3,000 hours of practice. Yeah. Jesus, what do I do? Your dad had trained for change. I then want to go into, would have been the similar when you left Washington, had that come to Damascus moment and then realised, wow, I am about change. I need to take this to the world. You would have been back here in the corporate world a similar time. I'd left the Aussie cricket team, forging the early scratchy part for anyone who's listening who knew me back then. I was a little bit loose, but I was trying to learn and adapt back then, and we were taught you got to be change ready. And I still sometimes get this in a keynote brief. Like, Andrew, can you come in and talk to this group? We need to be change ready. I now am provocative, as I know you are, because it's bullshit, right? Okay, we're going to make half the group redundant. We're bringing in AI. We're moving offices. So let's now train. That almost gives me shivers.
Yeah. What makes me really nervous is the people in the audience who are so attached to their desk that they never thought that change was possible. That's what really makes me nervous.
I don't like change.
I don't like change. I'm like, that's interesting. So, yeah, I mean, I in some form have been training for change, being a journalist for 17 years and having that very unusual upbringing. So, and like we knew we weren't normal. Like, we just knew our upbringing wasn't normal.
Your parents have a plane. That's
no. Well, Dad had a trucking haulage business, so he needed a light plane because the easiest way to replace parts on a semi-trailer hauling oil from the Moonee Jackson pipeline into Brisbane was to land a light plane on a remote highway, drop off the part, and then take off again. That's why he had a plane. It wasn't a G5, just to be clear. But we did grow up being thrown off the back of a boat 80 mile out to sea. That's how I learned to scuba dive. Like we didn't. Dad was expecting 3 boys. He got 3 girls, and he didn't treat us any differently. So in that respect, it was a whole different life lesson in resilience. But I had life lessons in adaptability every day as a reporter, and so I am comfortable with change. I try to seek it out. I try to see the signals. And when I came back to corporate Australia, I got the shock of my life because I just could not understand. It took me a while to understand that not everyone had been exposed to the possibilities of things changing as frequently as I had. So I realised that in my very small world, my job was a lot more important than I thought it was, because my job was to come in and help people be change ready, help people communicate change effectively. And I realised that I had a much bigger job ahead of me than what I assumed, because I just assumed everyone else was okay with change. That is not the case.
No, I think you tend to teach what you're good at, and you teach some of the challenges you've had. Sounds like you really ran towards teaching what you were good at, lessons from Dad, working as a journo, going through that big challenge when you lost the job, and then you take time to sit back and reflect, and you've got a small window until you're going to get kicked out of the country. You have to move fairly quick. I really want to give some practical tips, because you and I could talk, we'd do for hours, but just managing teams that either need to change or are underprepared for change. And then we want to stitch in some of the AQ, because I love that. We all know IQ back in the early 1900s, intelligence quotient. Then we had EQ with Daniel Goleman, really put that on the map around emotional intelligence. And now AQ, which is that adaptive intelligence. But first, the work that teams can do. A leader listening to this who is, let's face it, like even just what you were telling me before we went on air, what is happening now with coaching. like large groups, large leadership groups are now being signed up to coaching through AI. I can remember talking to some of my friends from coaching psych that I studied in Sydney Uni 2-3 years ago, and people going, oh, will it really get to that stage? That horse is not just bolted, it's way up the road. So what do teams do to get ready so they don't literally get left sitting there going, well, what happened?
Well, I had someone from a very large bank ask me about a month ago, what do I do? I've got 5,000 people who will not open Microsoft Copilot. And that's not a good problem to have at this point in 2025. And my response...
Why not?
Because they literally were afraid because they were afraid. It's not because they're... Like it's a lot of reasons, but essentially it's because they don't want things to change. And my response was, the first thing when we talk about something as simple as opening an AI app, the first thing we need to talk about to our teams is the facts about change. Like, when do we start outlawing the facts about change, that change is really hard, that it is disruptive, it is uncomfortable, we are not going to feel good about it for, a certain amount of time. And so my advice was, like, call out the facts about change, that we don't like it, we're not designed for it, we really love conserving energy, and we are addicted to sameness. Let's have a real conversation about what change means before we present the AI tool. Let's go back a few steps and give people the context that they deserve, that they need in order to have the confidence to say, what if I open this app and it makes my life easier? Get into the simulator. What if I open this AI tool and it frees me up to spend 80% more time with clients instead of burying me in the admin? So what are the opportunities? What's the upside of change? That's the conversation that we need to start.
So it's a better onboarding rather than just throwing people into it. Scared, fearful.
You can't tell me. Everyone listening I know has thought in the last few months, like, what if AI takes my job? But my response to that is, start using AI, start understanding how it can help you, and redeploy yourself before it redeploys you. Like, that is being engaged in change. That is paying attention. That's being an active player in shaping the kind of future that you want to be a part of. So that's where we need to start with teams, explaining and acknowledging the facts about change. And people might be too afraid because they may not have the psychological safety within the business to put their hand up and say, I'm really shit scared of we all are to a degree, but burying it is not going to be helpful when you're introducing the technology into the business.
And fear is deep-seated. It's wired in us for protection because, back in the olden times, as my kids say, Dad, what's it like in the old days? Like, shut up.
What was it like in the old days? Yeah, right.
Archie, I can remember him ask, he's 14, or nearly 14 now, he asked me, I think he was 7 or 8, he said, Dad, in the old days, was it black and white or colour? Because he'd seen about the change from black and white to colour TV. He's like, oh, mate, it was black and white. Oh, really? And then I had to tell him, just in case he said that at school, that no, it actually was colour.
But in the workplace, when we are presented with these new AI tools, we're in peak AI hype cycle at the moment, that's why it's more important to have these real conversations. But people associate it with, I'm going to lose my status, I'm going to lose my identity, I'm not just going to lose my job, I'm going to be financially down. There are all kinds of major loss that we associate. I'm losing resources, energy, because to learn a new tool, it's going to take me energy and time and effort out of what I could be doing, which is what I was always doing. So the loss is real. And we have to acknowledge that for many people, especially through the next few years, we are going to have friends and family and colleagues who are experiencing real, deep loss, and that needs to be acknowledged as part of this process.
I want to play back what I've learned today so far.
Yeah.
One is approaching loss and being realistic and the narrative around it. I'm even thinking, Wiz, about some of the training we do, how I can adapt that a little bit more. I keep using your word adapt. But sometimes I think I don't dive into the content. So just giving people a little bit of space to take a breath and reflect, and hey, I know this is going to be difficult and this is not going to be great, but if you look back, and I asked people this in one of my corporate workshops, Andrea, what was the event in your life that has led to the biggest growth? It's not when grandma or an auntie you've never heard of or met passes away and you inherit a couple of 100,000. It's getting through the tough stuff that makes you gritty. It's the resilience. So it's that framing around loss to start with. And the second part, how you're then using this adapt around AI and to grow with it. Whereas I think a lot of futurists come in, AI is going to change the world, we're going to lose. And it's fear-mongering. And then people go, shit. The reality is we need to, in our small business, we are absolutely leveraging AI. But I think where it's going now, and even where it is, we just started.
Theatre is not going to help. The theatre that sits around the future of work is not going to help. I believe that we have to be very decisive. And the decision that we all have to make is, am I going to build the fire break for myself, or am I going to put out the fire? There was a really interesting set of stories that came out of the LA fires that I was watching really closely. And just very briefly, I was watching a life coach in the Palisades the morning that the fires broke out. And she was, every morning before she started work, she did a mile. She walked a mile around her neighbourhood before she got into the day. Great idea. But when she walked around the side of her house, she could see these flames coming down the hill. And you could tell it was serious. Big fire, emergency. And you could hear the audio. You could hear her say to her neighbour, but I've got to get my mile in. So in the face of a fireball screaming down the hill, her brain was locked into her routine, right? She eventually went back, evacuated her house, and we all know what happened to the Palisades.
Check the signals, isn't that what you told us earlier?
Yeah, check the signals, right. Check, literally smoke signal. But that is interesting to me because it was an example of just that fixed mindset. But there was a very different story going on across the canyon where an older guy, an army vet, had seen how close the fires got 3 years ago. So he went out, he bought fire retardant and sprinklers, and he put sprinklers around the perimeter of his home, sprayed fire retardant across the whole house, and evacuated the house, and he saved his property. But for me, that was a simple understanding of the power of adaptability, that it's not just about responding, it's about anticipating change and therefore being an active player in how that's going to play out. So I think we need to be very decisive this year. And the decision we need to make is, are we going to build a fire break or are we going to put out the fire? Like where do you want to be? How do you want to run your life? Because I don't want to be putting out fires. I'd rather be thinking through, but you need, and it didn't surprise me at all that he was an army vet, because he would have spent most of his life understanding that what is true now may not be true in 5 minutes.
He's trained for change.
And you don't see paramedics panicking, do you? Because they're training for change.
They're training for change,
right?
Yeah.
So it's about understanding, and pilots know this as well, that what is true now may not be true in an hour. So how are you going to build the fire break to be better prepared for change? So that's what I think, that being decisive, the greatest gift we can give ourselves in 2025 is being decisive about where you want to sit.
As you said that, I'm running filter through other high performance domains. So defense, military, aviation, some of the entrepreneurs that work with sport. Sport is chaotic. You know?
Totally.
A game of football is 80 minutes of chaos.
Again, anything is possible. Tennis game on the weekend, anything is possible.
You're training for change. So if I update your model, number one, or update my learning, one is the narrative around loss. So I'm going to think about how I can have that more. And I think that builds that connection piece with people as well before you go into the change part. 2, understand change. And then 3, you've given some great examples with skills, like with your dad, with the LA fire break. So give us some skills around AQ for our audience. What are a couple of skills that we can work on?
So I would say I've got high AQ habits through the whole book. Engaging with signals of change is one of them. So cover that briefly, but simply have a conversation with your team once a quarter. Sit down and say, what are the signals of change that you are seeing that we need to pay attention to? And are they weak or are they mainstream? What we want to do is find a signal of change when it's weak, so we've got more time to do something about it. That's what I did when I got out of journalism in 2008. I saw my own behaviour changing. I gave myself a 5-year head start ahead of everyone else. So what is changing around us, and talk to the people around you about what are they seeing that I'm not seeing, because we all have blind spots, particularly around a business. So
you're not telling me any entrepreneur or business owner has a blind spot that their business is going to change the world and we get stuck doing the same thing over and over again and then look up and go, what happened? Who are these people you're talking about?
How much do we love confirmation bias? We just love being right. This is about not being right. This is about learning. And so I would also say the what if scenario, get your team, get into the simulator. Pilots are skewing for the negative, but let's skew for the positive. What are the opportunities that we can see in the change that might be a few years ahead for us? So, a brief example, I was working with Hearing Aid Australia a couple of years ago, June 2021. They were all worried about Specsavers offering hearing tests as well as iTest. And I said, don't worry about Specsavers, worry about Apple, because Apple are already talking to Cochlear. And 300 million people around the world already carrying the new version of hearing aids, and that's our AirPod, right? So don't worry about the standard competition. Worry about what else is possible. So really talk to your team about, and just have no constraints on thinking about those what-if scenarios, like what is possible, blow open your imagination. That's a really great exercise for everyone. Also, exploring versus exploiting. So the typical rule with explore versus exploit is we should spend 80% of our day doing the day-to-day and 20% exploring what might be able to upset us, disrupt us, or provide us with that opportunity. I know this is really ambitious in today's world, but I try to spend 50-50. I try to spend half my day doing email, doing the things I need to do, but then I spend the other half experimenting with AI, talking to people about what's changing. So I think that what's required of us today as modern leaders is to spend far more time exploring than triaging the admin of the day.
You know, when you go on a tour group overseas or here in Sydney where we're recording in the Rocks, and there's a tour group and the tour leader has a flag and they put the flag in the ground to put a stake, just to allow everyone to catch up. And here's the flag. So I'm putting a flag in the ground. As you say that, the difference between explore and exploit, people listening to this or watching this on YouTube, just think what percentage of your day, and for a lot of people it's going to be very small, do you actually spend exploring and not exploiting? The way I often teach this is in football, so rugby league, rugby union that I'm working in currently, our athletes will train 25 to 30 hours. I say to leaders, what are you competing? Oh, I'm competing 60 to 70 hours a week, Andrew. Okay, how much do you train? I'm too busy, because in your language, Andrea Clarke, I'm exploiting and there's no time for exploring. I hear you say that and I go, aspirational. I would love to spend 50% of my time. But for someone who is sitting, even I am here going, I just can't at the moment because of, you know what I do. How do people just build even a little window of exploitation? What are some strategies around that?
You're not going to like me. No one's going to like to hear this, but what I've done in my life is to get up earlier. This year, the only way I can spend more time exploring is to get out of bed an hour earlier.
Oh, I like that.
Just that simple. That's the only advantage, because we all have the same 24 hours, right? So, and I think we all know that when you've been up in those hours, those early hours, when there's that collective silence that you have across the neighbourhood, you feel as though you're getting away with something because no one else is awake.
I feel like I'm getting an edge because you're
totally,
there.
You are.
And no kids, no people, no clients, no athletes. It's just your time.
Like I said, people aren't going to like me, but...
Well, there's some people listening to us right now and watching us going, you two are
crazy.
Pack of absolute idiots.
But do you know what? I just think this is part of me building my own fire break, right? Is getting up earlier and getting into bed earlier every night as well. That's how but I'm a morning person. That's where my high performance energy, how I manage, place and protect my energy is really important. And the mornings are where I do my best thinking. So you've got to know yourself. But I think that's one way you can explore more often. I also think let's have an honest conversation about where we're leaking energy.
Did you read what I just wrote down? Because you've mentioned energy 4 or 5 times. I thought, will I, won't I? We've got to double click, because I'm an energy dealer.
That's right. And we can't lead ourselves or lead others properly unless we have a much greater understanding about where we're leaking energy. And so as a leader, self-leader, it doesn't matter where you sit across a business, my advice to people is say no to the baby shower on Sunday. Sorry, I'm going to be really controversial. But say no to that party that you don't want to go to. Say no to the barbecue that you feel obligated to show up to. Let's have an honest conversation about how and when we're leaking energy, because I know where I leak energy. I don't like small talk. I'd rather have a one-on-one with my friend and her new baby. Let's be honest about how we burn time unnecessarily and how we can get time back to rest, recuperate, regenerate, or restore, and in that time reflect on how we can explore what else is going on, because you need real reflection time for growth.
That's why I went with the energy, because when you're saying to people, ask what is possible and look at exploring versus exploiting. And if you're tired, fatigued, distracted, your backside's hanging out, you're looking at paycheck to paycheck, or you get in that same game and it's just, I call it the monochrome sea of grey. Your diary is grey, your clothes are grey, your eyes are grey, your stories are grey, just everything. I'm starting to fall asleep.
That's no way to live.
But if you don't have that energy, so do you reverse engineer that?
Yeah.
And on energy, do you first of all go, where are you leaking energy before you build?
Yeah, and to give you a really broad and simple explanation of my very personal experience with this the last 5 years, I'm obsessed with property, always have been. That's been a side hustle for me. But 4 years ago, I thought, I am spending so much time managing 4 or 5 properties. This is insane. It's too much. I'm leaking too much energy doing this. So, and also, interest rates are not going to stay at 1.9% forever. So what if I sell all my property and put it into, and also I don't have kids. So what do I think I'm doing with this property portfolio? What if I sold everything and bought one place in a neighbourhood that I'm really happy in? That is how I got a hold of my energy. That is how I decided to not do what every other Australian does around, because we have a really dysfunctional relationship with property, I think, in this country. And for me, that translated to me losing a lot of energy, like probably 15 hours a week managing. So I decided to give myself the gift of more energy. I have given myself 20 hours a week by selling down those properties and not having the stress of paying 7% interest on every single one of them. That is how I personally have re-engineered my life to have a peaceful, joyful, beautiful, simple life that has meaning, because now I'm able to give more to other people because I'm not caught up in the chaos of managing property. So that's my very personal example of what I'm talking about. But I think we all need to look at where we're leaking energy and have honest conversations about, just because I've always done that, does that mean I need to keep doing it moving forward?
I'm loving the conversation because it's a wrestle, and it's not.
It is a wrestle.
This is not you on Al Jazeera Channel 7 in bites with a beautiful script, beautiful makeup, hair, clothes. It's real.
It's messy. Life's messy. It's emotional.
Yeah. So can we go back a few frames?
Yeah, sure.
What did you feel? You looked up and I felt it, and I almost felt you went, no, don't go there. Go to the next thing. Can we go back? What did you feel?
I'll always go there, yeah.
Yeah. What did you feel?
At what point?
You were talking about simplifying from 4 or 5 homes to one, but like you were overcome with a wave of emotion.
Yeah.
What was that?
The relief. I always know I've made a good decision when I feel relieved. Always. And
is that a process for you?
Yeah.
So I'm putting on the coaching lens on this in what's happening. I can't wait to listen back to this because, this when you're in a conversation, you're engaged. You've got one eye on the conversation, then one eye on what's coming next. And then you can actually listen to it or watch it back and go, yeah.
When I look at the 4 principles of adapt, engage, accept what's changing, activate optimism for change, and release, for me, what I've noticed is I'm able to release things easily if I know they're holding me back. And when I feel relief, that's when I know I've made a good decision. Whether it's a partner who hasn't quite been right for me, or a job that hasn't been right, or 4 properties, I ask myself, what am I really holding on to here? With building property portfolio, I was holding on to this dysfunctional belief that will give me security, when all it gave me was chaos and stress. My definition of success is not having property, actually. It's not running a business with 25 people. My definition of success is having time for reflection, time for growth, and channeling that time into hopefully sharing what I've learned to help other people. But when I feel relief about a decision, that is how I know it's the right one.
You've made some shifts from the keynote you were in last week that I did on energy.
Yeah.
You've made an impact on me on the podcast. So I am really going to think about simplifying. So the thought bubbles that were going on in my head was, I've got some complexity that I think I can realign, restructure, and just free up some energy. Don't normally get that shift in a podcast. So thank you.
Well, we are all going to need more energy for change in the next few years. And how else are we going to find that energy? We only have 24 hours. So it's identifying where we're leaking it, and it's figuring out what's going to work for us. What are those small habits and shifts that we need to make to allow us to have the energy for change that we're going to need? Because it's exhausting. And as anyone listening knows, often being the recipient of change happening to you, that usually happens when you have the least amount of energy for change, as my close, great friend Lisa Stevenson has shared with me. It's so true. You want to make decisions when you feel good, when you feel strong, and when you feel not just motivated and empowered, but when you feel agentic, when you've got the agency for change. So I always think about that as holding a box of matches with a match, and when you hit that strike panel, like that's motivation. You've got motivation and empowerment, but unless you strike that panel, that's agency. That creates agency, and unless but you've got to be in a certain place to deliver on the agency. So that requires energy.
In wrapping this podcast up, I'm going to do the flip, and the flip is there a question in preparation that you thought I'd ask that I haven't? Or the flip, is there a question you want to ask me?
I'm really moved by your presentation last week. So for anyone listening, Andrew delivered to a packed house of 800 leaders and an overflow room, by the way, with a live stream at Amazon, at the Sydney ICC, massive venue. And I've never seen you present. And I loved every single moment of that presentation because it's helped me understand how athletes manage their energy effectively. And you think you understand it, but you don't until you listen to you. And bringing some of those principles into my day-to-day is something that I'm doing as a result of that. So I think my question for you is, for anyone who hasn't seen you speak, can you just share with us even just the bouncing ball? Because that has changed the game for me, just understanding that pause.
Thank you. As I said to you before, coming from you with your communications background, what you do, it means a lot. So I want to acknowledge that and do not just go, I've got to get better at that. I've been told by a few people. That's a culmination of 20 years. So that 30-minute presentation, I've done 2,500 presentations, and that includes boardroom presentations for 10. I'm talking every week with different athletic teams. And I tell you what, if you want to hone your material and look at message and soundbite and not waffle on, it's a sporting team, because they'll tell you. Right through to a couple of times a year, I'll present overseas for up to 15,000 people. So that aperture now is from small, intimate group to 15,000. It's just taken thousands and thousands of hours of practice and domain expertise. And if you ever get to the stage where you think, I've totally schooled this, we talk about mastery. And if someone ever said, I'm a master in this, give up. I'm still learning. I'm still adapting. I was nervous before that presentation, but I loved it. You're using the heart rate monitors. So for context, we wired up 10 people in the room with heart rate monitors, and then that goes up on the big screen.
It was amazing. It was so cool.
Talking about what stress does to your physiology. And then Kate, her heart rate got up to Huey told me it was up
wild.
to 178 or 179. And I told the group that I was going to get one of them to get up on stage for 2 minutes and do a delivery. And she got up, which was great. And then she just looked white, ashen-faced. And we looked at her heart rate, said, look, Kate, it's stimulus response. I'm not going to do it. She went, thank God. I think she actually hugged me. But that's taken 20 years or more of doing that. So even the messages like the bouncing ball, for context, in sport, in a game of tennis, there's 20 seconds to bounce the ball between points. Cricketers, men and women, do gardening. There's a 4-ton roller that rolls the pitch for you. Netballers will pivot the ball. It's all a way of centering. And even in rugby league, the halfback will sort of fit around with the ball and then feed it in. If it's union, it's a proper scrum. If it's league, it's the second row. So with sport, there's all these examples of pulsing between high intensity and low intensity. We don't do that in our life. We just turn on like lights in the studio or a camera in static linearity. It's building that story in to build a pulse in using examples from sport. That's taken 20 years to try and teach it in a simple way, backed with evidence.
So powerful. And when you look at the role of energy management in self-leading, that is going to be the foundation, because we can't lead ourselves or anyone else unless we can pulse, unless we can effectively manage our energy.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing you do more keynotes. And after talking to you before, I've got a new book to write. You've given me some more work, but you've given me a process. You've given us a process. I like the simplification model. And to the audience, I really do want them to spend a bit of time reflecting, move forward. What would a great life look like in 5 or 10 years? Because we've been whipped into this frenzy, Andrea, that it's the drop and drag society. When I hear someone has a hack, fuck me, like a hack is work really hard for decades.
There's no shortcut.
Have a clear plan, and then you might just get to where you're wanting to go.
But have the courage to be yourself. Have the courage to understand what is changing around you and create a future that is your preferred future, not one that is simply plausible or that someone else is creating for you. Be an active player in your own future.
Adapt, mastering changes in 4 steps. You live it, you breathe it. For people who would like to book you as a speaker, for people who'd like to book you to run leadership programs, or people who want to find out about your books and what else you do, where do they find you?
AndreaClarke.com.au.
With an E, Andrea, Clarke, CLARKE.com.au. I work with a few Clarks and I've been known to drop an E every now and then, so we've got to get the right address. Hey, thank you.
Thanks.
It's been a really insightful, reflective conversation.
Thanks for having me.